I think we're live. Recording has started.
Okay. Thank you so much for attending our Understanding Diversity and Equity and Inclusion presentation today. My name is Ed Dry. I'm the Director of Community Services here at the Medina County Board of Developmental Disabilities. I'm also the Chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee here at the County Board. And we've been together for a little over 2 years now. And while we're not experts on diversity, equity, and inclusion, also referred to as DEI, we've learned a lot over the last couple of years, and we'd like to share some of that information and some of our insights that we've learned over the last couple of years with you today. When we first started meeting as a committee, you can go to the next slide, Nicole. As we started meeting about diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the questions we asked was why? Why do we need diversity, equity, and inclusion? Why is that important for businesses and agencies to have that, to learn about that? And research has shown that, DEI research has shown that companies that promote and implement DEI practices and culture have happier employees, that stay longer in their company, and have better customer service. Equitable employers have employees that show more commitment and trust in their workplace. And of course, we in the field of developmental disabilities understand how important it is for individuals that we serve to be recognized within their communities, to be treated equitably, and finally to be included in our community. So we know that DEI benefits society as a whole, individual businesses, employers, and of course individuals as well. So today we're going to be going over some aspects of DEI, including identities and perspectives, unconscious bias, different types of forms of exclusion, and then what can you do on a day-to-day basis to help with DEI concepts and culture. So we're going to start out with a member of our committee, Jerry Thomas. Jerry?
Thanks, Ed. Like Ed said, my name's Jerry Thomas. My position here at the County DD Board is an individual supports coordinator. I use pronouns of he and him and his when I'm presenting information to folks or when I'm introducing myself. And what I get to talk about is this slide where we're really looking at what are we talking about, is what when we're talking together about diversity, about inclusion, about equity, what is it that we mean? I always, when I think about the push in general and in our society today to make, and in businesses to have diversity, equity, and inclusion as a focal point. I like to think of it as DIE because I think, and I'll talk about why that is. But I get why we say DEI, because DI isn't a very good acronym. But I really am a believer that how we talk about things and how we define things and say things makes a difference in how we think about things. And and part of that is, you know, I've grown up and in this field for a pretty long time, 30 years plus of being in this field of developmental and intellectual disabilities. People first language has been a very important thing to me. And part of that is because it makes my thinking of what I'm saying, it makes me hear it out loud and makes me think about it before I get too much farther down the road. So that's why I think when we're talking about what some of these definitions are, it really does make a difference that we all know are on the same page to start. So diversity, it's just it's the melting pot. It's what individuals with different identities and experiences and backgrounds, it's the fact that we do come together in different places, especially in the workplace in this case, and that everybody that comes brings their own self, their own, and it's not just what we can see, it's the whole being of that person, and everything that's gone into making that person who and what they are is really involved in the diversity. there's things that we notice right off the bat, but there's also a lot of things, our style of thinking, our style of interacting, whether I'm an introverted person or a person who's more extroverted or shy around people or outgoing with people, which are, the same things, but those are all part of, and we're going to talk about identity later, but my personal identity that I bring to that, and then everybody's collective personal identities that they bring to the table make up that diversity. Inclusion is everybody having the same opportunity to participate and contribute regardless of who they are and what it is that they're bringing to the table. So, including everyone, I'm included. Part of our agency's push and part of what we talk about whenever we're together is that we're working together towards making improvements and being a resource for folks, but we do it together, and we can't be together without including everyone who's with us. Equity then is when systems provide for a just treatment, access, and opportunity for all, and that's a tough one. And we're going to look a little bit in a moment about what that can look like. But because, as Ed had said, our workplaces are constantly changing and evolving, dynamic work environments require us to have diverse groups of people who can both contribute and be supportive of the contributions of others every day when we come to work. Together, groups have a power that's just so much stronger than individuals, and that's why we need to work together to do that. And it sounds simple, but it's not easy. And doing these things it becomes easier the more we do it, but we have to make a conscious effort and be intentional about our efforts and our individual efforts when we're in groups to make sure that we're being aware of the other people's diversity and what they're bringing and the richness that brings, and that we're really striving for those ideals of equal access and equal justice for all. If we could go to the next slide, please. It may repeat a little bit of what I just said. Diversity is when individuals from different groups and backgrounds come together in the workplace. Bringing together people of different perspectives isn't enough. For everyone to share their perspectives, each individual must feel that they are being included and treated with fairness and equity. And we do that, we start doing that by listening to each other and accepting each other where we are. Not and trying, and I do it. I have preconceived notions or I see something, but I have to set those aside when I come together with a group of people and say, what can we accomplish? It's not my agenda. What's our agenda going to be? What can we do together? If we go to the next slide, please. And we're going to play this little clip, and it really does a better job than I can do describing it, of showing some different what we're talking about, the differences between equity, inclusion, and diversity.
Let's get the conversation started. Equity is not the same as equality. What if the shoe industry designed all shoes to fit an average size? What if they made all shoes equal? That sounds ridiculous because we are all different sizes. We don't try to make everyone fit the same shoe. We design for variability. That's equity. Each person is provided access to what is needed. To further illustrate this point, consider giving everyone the same box to stand on to look over a fence. This is equality, but it doesn't make any sense to give someone something to stand on if it's not needed. Instead, we want to provide what is actually needed for each person to have access. This is illustrated in this image as the first person. The second person got just what was needed. The third person in this illustration gets assistance, but it doesn't solve the issue. Consider this picture. This is equity. Each person gets what is needed in order to provide access. What is needed varies between circumstances. Resources are allocated differently to allow everyone opportunities for success. But what if there was a way to remove the barrier for everyone? Instead of providing resources, we consider how to remove the barrier for all. Equity is promoting justice, impartiality, and fairness within the procedures, processes, and distribution of resources by institutions or systems. This is justice. You already know examples of this through universal design, cuts in the sidewalks, changing the font size or contrast on your phone, and buttons to open doors automatically are all examples of removing barriers for all. Universal design not only provides access for those with a disability, but it benefits everyone. Considering barriers, looking for options to remove barriers, and providing access for all are all examples of promoting equity. Change starts from within. Keep engaging and learning to make a difference. Let's continue the conversation.
One of the things that really strikes me in that short clip is the part about removing barriers. And there's barriers that I don't think of when I'm sitting by myself, but when I'm sitting with a group of people who may be able to identify barriers I don't see, that goes a long way towards creating some of those equitable situations, because my blinders are on sometimes, and that's not that's part of who I am. Is I grew up and I got ideas in my head that or I was taught things that maybe were values of other people, and I had to create my own values. But I have to be open to the values and the experiences and the observations of other people as well, to help me be able to see in an open-minded way what some other barriers that I'm unable to see might be, and then not be threatened by those observations, but be willing to put forth effort to say, what can I do about it for me and to help the good of the whole. So identity is what I bring to it. Every one of us brings our own identity to the table, to the situation. It's the characteristics that make up me. It's what makes me me. And my identity, there's so much that goes into it, from when I was a little kid, as I've grown, as I've been around in the field, as I've the life experiences I've had. Some of my identities today are husband and employee and dad, and I get in the recent years, the last 2.5 years, I've gotten a new identity as grandpa. And there's just so many things, and I get to build upon that identity, and it's never really all that stagnant. There's some things that have been pretty firmly grounded, but it's something that can have be able to be flexible and grow. We experience situations in workplaces differently based on our identity and our perspective. And I need to, as a person in any situation, show respect and openness to others that are engaging in the process by avoiding stereotypes and assumptions about them. I can't just look at somebody, and I do this. I'm guilty of doing this. I'm guilty of seeing someone and making a snap judgment before somebody even opens their mouth. I have to put that aside. I have to put that aside and let their identity come through as what they tell me their identity is, and what they are expressing, and not be the person who assigns it to someone else. I have to have my own and let other people have their own identity. If we can go to the next slide, please. And I believe this is also another video for us to watch about identities and perspectives.
Perspective taking is a valuable skill in many aspects of life and leadership. When we talk about perspective taking, we're referring to the process through which one is able to see a situation from the viewpoint of another, understanding their feelings, intentions, thoughts, or view of a particular situation. It doesn't mean we have to agree with their point of view. However, there is understanding and empathy. One of the things that is clear is that we all have our own perspective or way of seeing the world. For example, consider this image. What do you see? Please write down what you see in this image. Did some of you see a rabbit? Did some of you see a duck? Why do you think that is? This exercise demonstrates that even when presented with the same scenario, or in this case, image, we may see things differently. From one person's perspective, it may be a rabbit, and for another, a duck. Some may see something entirely different. It all depends on your perspective. Many aspects of life influence our perspective, such as our experiences, values, personality traits, information available, personal biases, and more. One's viewpoint can also change depending on your physical position or in the role you play. For example, not everyone on a football field has the same view. Your perspective can vary drastically depending on your place on the field and position, such as quarterback, O-lineman, or free safety. Sometimes, to understand others and to see from others' perspectives, we must reposition ourselves, both physically and mentally. When we acknowledge that there are many ways to see the world, we quickly see why perspective taking is valuable as we work to do things like improve race relations and advocate for social justice causes. Here are a few things to keep in mind. Perspective taking allows you to consider the experiences and viewpoints of others. By doing so, you improve your ability to understand, empathize, connect, and communicate. Finally, when you practice perspective taking, you can be a more effective advocate for others and the issues you care about the most.
So before we get to unconscious bias, when I see that clip of the rabbit, and whether it's a rabbit or a duck, it reminds me of an experience I've had, and I have it quite often. At some point when I was growing up, somebody pointed out to me in looking up in a night sky at the full moon that there is a rabbit that can be seen in the shadows of the moon. And whenever I look up into the sky at a full moon, I can see without even trying to do it, and I can see that rabbit in the moon. My wife grew up being shown the shadows that can show the face of a man in the moon. And some people see that. Some people see the face of a man in the moon. And that's kind of where that phrase comes from, the man in the moon, because it can be, and it's easier, it's easier for me to show somebody both of these if instead of just talk about them. But when I look up at the sky, I see one of those two things. Well, that's not entirely true. When I look up at the sky, I see the rabbit because that's my bias about what's going on when I look at the moon. I know that the man is there, the face of the man in the moon is there. I have to look for and have somebody help me or remember what was the description of how we get that and how can I see that? And it's not necessarily an either or, it's a both and. There's possibilities that other people look up at the moon and see something that's entirely different. They'd see neither of those or see something entirely different. And that's okay too. My bias when I look up is to see that. My job is to be open to the fact that my bias doesn't mean that I'm the only, that's the only thing that counts. Bias we sometimes hear of as a bad word. It's just a difference. If I can look at bias as something that's kind of neutral in terms of whether it's good or bad, it just is. But to talk to us more about bias and especially unconscious bias, Courtney's going to join us and talk about those. Thanks, Courtney.
Jerry. I'm Courtney Jordan. I'm the provider relations specialist here at the county board, but I sit on our DEI committee as a person with a disability. So I am going to speak a little bit about unconscious bias, but I think first we'll play the YouTube video. And this slide, please.
What would the world look like if everybody were aware of the stereotypes that they have and the biases that they have? When we talk about unconscious bias, we're basically saying our worldview can actually exert an influence beyond our conscious awareness, and it creates ambiguity.
You go to an engineer who's built something extremely innovative, and you say, who do you think your user is? This is where I have the most fun. My name is TV Raman, and I led our work on Android accessibility for 3 years. Write down everything that you think you know about your user with respect to abilities, inabilities, special abilities, disabilities. Almost every assumption that you write down on that whiteboard about this is the user I think I'm building for is questionable, because our various unconscious biases define the boundaries you're unwilling to expand.
These biases, they're the shortcuts that our brain has created so that we can deal with the information that we process every single day.
Right when we see anyone, whether we think about it or not, we are implicitly, automatically making judgments about how warm and competent that person or thing is.
All humans need to make decisions, and so we fill in the blanks because our brains are wired to do that, and we fill in with things we don't know with, past experience. Oh, you pattern map to someone I think I should hire, so I'm going to hire you versus this person because they didn't map, because I can't fill in the blank because they don't look like me, or they're not from my same background, and so I can't see how they're going to make the jump.
Every single person is great at things that you may not expect them to be, but it's really hard for us to see that when we're so powerfully guided by the things we expect to be true in the world.
I grew up surrounded with this conversation about what you can't do and what you won't be able to do. My name's Enrico, and I'm an autistic software engineer. The first time I go through the performance review process, I was asked for 5 strengths. It was the first time that I had ever been prompted to think in that way about myself, and it was really a life-changing moment for me.
When we are working in our day-to-day jobs, we are still making judgments about the people around us, about the resumes we see, about the employees that we're trying to decide, whether to put them on teams or not.
People are very wedded to the idea that they can perceive something objectively, and statistically they're wrong, but it's hard. You become attached to this idea that you can assess something by looking at it.
These subtle assumptions we make about people can have lasting effects on who we're promoting, who we're hiring, who we're putting in leadership positions. We have the responsibility to understand the assumptions that we make and understand the errors that we make.
But it's not just for the collective good. If you take the time to understand more about this, there are things that you can implement for yourself that'll help you develop as a leader and to do your job even better.
It made me realize how often I have a very strong belief that is simply incorrect. When I look at one of these evaluation situations, the first question is, how can I eliminate the sources of potential bias and leave just the data so we can actually make better decisions?
If you're not conscious of the biases that you have, you're just not contributing at the level that you could, and you're not innovating at the level you could. And so your products won't be as good. Your results won't be as good.
When you think outside the box with respect to the assumptions you made about how somebody would use this wonderful thing you built, and when you sort of broaden that perspective as to who you change the world for, you build something even bigger.
Okay, and like the video says, unconscious bias is just the automatic assumptions that your mind makes as soon as you see a person. You're not even really aware of it. It just happens automatically, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. It's just something to be aware of. I know as a person with a disability, sometimes as soon as people see me, they develop their own biases. Let me give you an example. Recently, I was picked up by my transportation provider, and it was in the morning, and I was headed down the driveway, and myself and my home health aide, we leave my house at the same time. And I said goodbye to the home health aide and went down my driveway. and got on the bus. And the driver said, "It's nice that you can say goodbye to your mom every day." And I said, "Well, that's not my mom. That's just a lady who works for me. She's my staff." And then I got on the bus and we were headed to work. And the same person said, "Well, I guess it's time for me to drop you off at school." And I said, this was in the same trip, I said, "Well, the county board has a school, but actually I work there. I'm an employee." And the person said, "Oh, they pay you?" I think she had the unconscious bias that she saw me with the disability using a wheelchair, and she just automatically assumed that I wasn't as capable of working as I am. Another instance of unconscious bias was a couple of years before. I had a new home health aide who hadn't been to my house very many times, and she was helping me one day, and she was getting ready to leave. She said, "Okay, well, I'm getting ready to leave. My shift is over. Where's your medicine?" And I said, "What do you mean? I don't need any medicine. I'm not sick." And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, I thought all people with disabilities needed medicine." And I said, "No, that's not necessarily true. You know, not all people with disabilities are ill, and we're not necessarily frail." So those are some times when people, I think, have had unconscious bias towards people with disabilities just by looking at me. And it doesn't really make them bad people. It's just things that they need to be aware of so that maybe they don't make those mistakes or have those assumptions in the future. If we could go on to the next slide, please. Here is an activity that maybe you could do. Let's see, if you could please answer the following questions sometime when you have time. If you think of someone who you might have met, it could be a customer, a client, someone outside of work, and think about when you met them. These questions: what was your immediate impression of this person? And what was it about them that gave you that impression? And after you got to know them, did you categorize them unfairly? And what was it that made you categorize them unfairly? And how can you be more mindful in the future to avoid bias? I know there's been times in my life where I have had unconscious bias towards people. For example, I used to have, again, a home health aide who was very young, and the very first time that I met her, this person was covered absolutely head to toe in tattoos. And I thought to myself, who is this person? And I was actually kind of scared of working with her because I thought, what kind of judgment is she going to have? You know, but and I just thought that from the way she looked. But as I got to know her, it turns out that she was the best worker. She was very friendly. She did a great job. I was always very safe and very well cared for when she was with me. And so that taught me a very big lesson, that you can never really judge a book by their cover. And just because of the way someone looks, you can't or should not make judgments about them. And for people in our audience that might be providers, we always tell people one way of getting to know the person that you're working with is obviously to read their ISP or life plan, because that has information about the person. And I agree with that, reading through the life plan and getting that information from there. But then also, it's very important to just get to know that person, kind of set aside the things that are in the life plan a little bit and get to know them kind of a one-on-one level. And just say, hey, ask the team members or the person, what really is that person's life like? What do they like to do? What are some things that I need to know? Because really, the more you get to know a person, the easier it is to avoid biases in the future. So if we could go to the next slide. This is one of a very good YouTube video, and it's a concept that is very important. It's about not putting people in boxes. So go ahead and play the video.
It's so easy to place people in boxes, drawing lines, creating sides. There's us, and there's them. Those we feel comfortable around, and those we don't. There are those of us with many chapters, and those just starting their own stories. There's the well-to-do, and those doing what they can. There are those we share something with, and those we don't seem to share anything with.
Welcome, and thank you for coming today, guys. Today I'm going to be conducting an experiment where I'll ask you a series of questions. Now, these questions will be very personal questions, and for us to get a true result, I need you to be completely honest with how you respond. The first question I have is, who in here was the class clown? Who is never on time?
And then there's us. We who have tattoos. We who feel lonely. We who have been bullied. We who have bullied others. We who are madly in love. We who have overcome great adversity. And there's the lucky ones, whose team won the championship this year. We who beat cancer. And then there's all of us who are created in the image of God. And as one body, we stand together. United as one under His grace.
I think that video has a really great message. People start off in their own distinct boxes, but really they're just part of a whole society. And I would like to see our society be a little bit more like that, where we're all just one group working together. Next slide, please. I would like to talk now about a form of exclusion, and that form of exclusion is microaggressions. And what microaggressions are is just, they can be even little statements or jokes. Someone who says something that might be considered a microaggression might not even know that they're doing it. But for the person that hears the microaggression or has that happen to them, over time, they can really build up and become very harmful. And like the slide says, we might think it's a joke, a compliment, or a question about someone's identity can be offensive and cause harm. And that's a form of bias. And if you see on the slide, there is the picture of the 3 healthcare workers. They're each holding a statement that I'm sure if they heard it over time, they definitely would feel like a microaggression. For example, the person in the middle is holding a sign that says, "Do you speak English?" You know, someone automatically assumed based on the way that they looked, you know, maybe they didn't even speak English. And if you hear that a lot of times over your life, that can just feel very harmful. Or the doctor is holding a sign that says, "Are there any doctors from America here?" Maybe someone is just assuming based on how they look that they're not from America, and that seems like a very racist statement. So, and then finally, there's the final person is holding a sign that says, "Nurse, can you help me find a doctor?" Well, maybe that person already is the doctor, and a patient or a person in society just assumed that they were a nurse. And so those are forms of microaggressions. And again, it might not even be something that you're automatically aware of, but if you hear other people in your daily life say these microaggressions or act in these ways, don't be afraid to call them out on it, and just be aware, you know, when you are speaking yourself, that you don't commit these microaggressions. And I think right now, I would like to turn it over to Jerry again.
Was this me or was this Ed? I thought Ed had a couple here and then it was me again, but it doesn't matter. Do you remember, Ed?
Yeah, you had these next 2 slides, and then I come in after that.
Okay, good enough. I've kind of forgotten. I fell asleep at the switch there for just a second. Not really fell asleep. I was thinking about what Courtney was saying about some of those microaggressions and what we can do when we're in relationship with people. We don't always get it right the first time. And we get comfortable in our own zones too, about some of the things that we say. An example that came to mind recently, some providers worked together and they were talking about some of the folks that they get to spend time supporting. And it was overheard that somebody said, "Oh, I really like working with her. She's just as crazy as I am." Well, in that one-on-one conversation, I think those folks probably didn't mean anything nefarious by that, but somebody else overhearing that might get a wrong impression, might get a different flavor for that. So just in being careful of how we refer to what we do and who the people are that we're talking to or about. Remembering and that jokes really are, there's a lot of jokes that are usually at the expense of somebody else or something else, and that those can really be a form of microaggression, or just thinking about what is it saying about when I say this joke? What is it saying about what some of my unconscious biases may be, or what are some of the things I grew up with? I think of a couple of things that I grew up with. I think about there was a joke that said, "What time do people who are Asian?" And that's not the way that the joke was said, "Go to the dentist." And the answer was 2:30. Oh, ha, ha, ha. Well, really, it made fun of people that were different from me, that come from a different culture than me, that talk different than me. And it just, it's somebody else's expense. There was a saying that my grandma used to say when she was talking about, don't call people names because it's something that you're doing yourself. And she used to say, that's like the pot calling the kettle black. And there's nothing really, what I say, and I still like the concept of what that says. It means that if I'm seeing something that I'm pointing out in somebody else, there's a pretty good chance that I've also got that going on in me. When I say that phrase these days, I usually say that's like the pot calling the kettle black, or names, so that it's the same concept, but it doesn't pick out any one person or any one characteristic or any one thing to make it be the example. And then there's going to be times that because we're in relationships that we're going to step in it, we're going to make mistakes. And so how do we, when we're engaging and we make mistakes, one of the biggest things we can do is acknowledge that and apologize. And if we notice that, Courtney mentioned calling someone else out about something that you might hear, but doing that with recognizing too that there's probably not a negative intention going on there, but trying to be educational and supportive of that person and sharing in a way that helps us all to improve and grow about it. I love what one of my colleagues says about just that often we just need to allow each other a little bit of grace because we're not always acting on our own best. Although when we are in relationships, we're also, I believe this about people, that most people, most of the time, are doing the best they can based on what's worked for them and what they believe and what's worked for them in the past. And, I can't discount that, but I need to be not threatened by the fact that somebody is different from me. As I looked at the end of that, that very well done, not putting people in boxes. We're not even all under the same impression of there's necessarily a same theological drive to that, that we don't all always believe in either the same God or a God, which, is good. It's good for me to be able to recognize that. I don't need to agree with somebody else's opinion about that or statement about that. But I need to be sensitive to it and realize that they may have a different view of it than I do, and that's okay. That's okay for them. So what are some of the things we can do to engage about making sure that I'm including people and working towards that ideal of equity? And it is an ideal, like I said before, we don't always get it 100%, or we try to get close to it. And I'm not sure, that the human experience is ever going to get us there 100% of the time, just because humans are messy. But I can do things to help. I can build trust. And this says, what can you do to engage? And there are things that, you know, if I do it for myself, I like to turn this around to what can I do to engage? I can build trust. I can stop and think before I act. Sometimes I think of that as a retreat, stop, step back, regroup, think about what I may or may not need to say, and then maybe respond, maybe not. Retreat, regroup, and respond is a good way to stop and think before I act. Gain permission before I engage on someone else's behalf. And again, if I'm pointing something out that's from my perspective, make sure somebody hears that and that I'm not judging them because of what I'm necessarily saying about an observation I make. Make sure that I understand a situation fully rather than jumping to conclusions. I don't know the whole story. I didn't see the whole thing. I didn't hear. I don't know what went up to what went on in your life today before you came into the room, and now we're having a disagreement about something, or that we're not working in tandem with each other because we're at odds. I don't know what all the situations that went into that. And, you know, maybe they're not relevant to the situation right now, but at least by recognizing that maybe there's something else that happened, that it isn't always about me, that there's, you know, I also believe that people tend to act a lot of times in their own self-interest. And when we're being together, we have to set some of those self-interests aside and be other interested as well. I do, whenever I'm interacting with somebody, I need to respect their feelings and try to listen. You know, I think listen for and be in relationships and try to understand what the other person is saying. Something else that helps me is I try not to believe everything that I think. You know, that first thought that pops into my mind is sometimes something that I have to set aside and say, but what's really going on here? The one suggestion that I do like to make for folks, and something that I try to go back and do every once in a while now, I've taken some of the self-examination kinds of tests that are available on this website that's referenced on this slide at the Harvard Implicit Bias Project, or Implicit Associations Project. And if you go there, there's a way to take some tests that just kind of give you the challenge you to take a look at yourself and what are some of the things that impress you or maybe influence you, that I'm not even aware of. And I've had my eyes open a couple times doing that, and I think it's a worthwhile activity to go through on an individual and personal basis if I'm looking to make improvements in myself towards working together and being more equitable with other folks. So I encourage folks to take a look at that and do with it what you will. And I'm going to go turn it back over to Ed to wrap it up. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jerry and Courtney. So just to kind of finish up here, one activity that you can do that kind of help you with engaging is to think about a situation that's happened to you in the past where you saw something that was biased and exclusionary. This could be something that happened in your personal life, at work, but answer some of the questions that we have here. What exclusionary behavior did you see? How did you react to that? How did you engage? And did you engage? Did you get involved with assisting with dealing with that biased exclusionary behavior? What would you do differently now? Would you handle that in a different way? Kind of like what Jerry said earlier is, you know, there's ways to kind of engage and deal with that without being rude or disrespectful. Sometimes it's just seeing the person that's getting being biased towards or excluding and try to exclude them. That's a way that you can in the future engage in that activity, or when you see that type of behavior, kind of address that and address it on an individual basis. So let's go to the next screen. So in conclusion, we kind of just want to reflect on what Jerry and Courtney kind of gone over and the things that we've addressed, and how can each and every one of us deal with DEI and spread that theme throughout our life and through our work. So we kind of came up with some ideas of ways that we can engage or act in certain situations to help with dealing with the biased and exclusionary behavior, to have better diversity, equity, and inclusion in our everyday lives. The first one is to kind of go over and commit to learning about other people's perspectives and how they experience the workplace. As Jerry kind of indicated earlier, to be able to step back and realize that each and every person has a different perspective, and each and every person has had a different experience that have led them to have that perspective. So to step back and realize that you have a perspective that others also have, most likely a different perspective than you, and to respect that perspective and understand that perspective. The next thing is your commitment to engage when you see biased or exclusionary behavior. Again, that would be, first of all, identifying it either in yourself or in others. As we talked about, Courtney talked about unconscious bias, is the fact of the matter is we all have unconscious bias. Each and every one of us have it. And to be able to recognize that we have that unconscious bias, whether it be when we see someone, even when you see someone's name, we automatically assume certain things based on an individual's name. So you have to recognize that you have that unconscious bias, that we all have that. And then when you engage with someone, that you understand that that bias is there, and try to be more open-minded. And finally, the commitment to act by including others, exhibiting kindness and empathy, and supporting others. That is how you act upon diversity, equity, and inclusion, is to recognize your biases, show empathy towards others, identify when you're seeing unconscious bias, and acting in a way that helps and supports others to minimize exclusionary behavior, to minimize when equity is not considered. Because those are the actions that increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplaces and in our life. Thank you so much for coming and watching the video today. And thank you. Thank you, Courtney and Jerry, for helping. Have a great day.